So the first thing to do is identify what type of factoring it is. So if you look in the first column, what I did is underneath I wrote what type it was. So they have something the same, and I'll do that. Here it's guess and check, where you're doing the 2 parentheses. Here you can square root both. This one is the sum of cubes that you learned this unit. This one is find something that is the same and then its difference of cubes. So it's last unit and this unit. This is factor by grouping, this unit. This is called advanced guess and check, and we'll get to the last one at the bottom. So the first thing that I did is I rewrote each of them, and feel free to pause and write down the types so that you're clear how they look. Okay. Now I'm going to start by actually factoring each one, and then we'll deal with the solving in a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is, since I notice they have something the same, I'm going to break it down. Okay, I circle the 3 and the x. So I'm left with 3x is what they have the same, and then I'm left with 3x plus 1. That's the factor. We'll worry about the solve later. Okay, this is guess and check, so I'm going to guess and check. I have 2 options. There's 10x times 1x, which is 10x. Okay, so my goal is to get the 1 in the center, so I need to look at the 3. So I'll try putting the 3 there and the 1 there. But 1 and 10 will not give me 1. So I switch them. 3 and 10, I won't get the 1, which means instead of it being 10x, the other option is 5 times 2. Okay, now I'm going to try this again. I get 6 and 5. I can subtract 6 minus 5 and get 1, but in order for it to be a negative 1, I need to take the sign of the bigger number. So the bigger number, the 6, needs to be negative. So that means since that's negative, that's touching. Boom, I factored it. So this is my answer for factoring. I'm going to erase this part so that you can see in the end. Okay, there's 2 of them and I can square root them. The square root of 9x squared is 3x, and the square root of 1 is 1. So 3x plus 1, 3x minus 1. Let me put a box on that one above 2. This is the sum of cubes. So remember how for this one it's the square root. So it's what times what gives you 9x squared. 2 things. This is what times what times what gives you x cubed. What times what times what gives you 125, and that's 5. And based on the formula, if you remember, you take that as it is, you square the first guy, you square the last guy, you put these together. Since that is plus, that's minus plus. Okay. Now, I know this isn't the difference of cubes because you can't take the cube root of 3 or of 24. And then I look and it doesn't apply to any of those. So I notice they have something the same. So I'm going to take out a 3. I'm just laying it out. And then I'd be left with 3x cubed minus 8. Now, this right here is just like the sum of cubes, but it's the difference of cubes. So I'm figuring out what times what times what is x cubed, and that's x. What times what times what is 8, and that's 2. So I don't want to forget that 3, small parentheses, big parenthesis. Take that as it is. Square the first guy, like I did here. Square the last guy, like I did here. Take those and put them together. Since this is minus, this is plus. Okay. This is factor by grouping. Remember, in order for it to be factor by grouping, there needs to be 4 of them. And I'm literally going to group them. So I'm going to take care of those 2, and those 2 will stay together. And then I'm going to take care of these 2, and those will stay together. So I'm going to GCF the first group. 5xxx, negative 5, 2xx. I see the 5 groups, and then 2 of the x's group. So I'm left with 5x squared, parentheses, x, minus 2. Now remember, factor by grouping means I need to find a match. So if this is plus minus, and this is minus plus, I need to be aware that since this is plus minus, that needs to be plus minus. The only way for that to happen is I need to take out the negative. Oops. Okay, so I see the 2, but remember I need to acknowledge the negative, which really a positive is 2 negatives. So I'm taking out a negative 2, and then I'm left with x minus 2. You see there's a match. There has to be a match. If there isn't a match, you either made a mistake or it's not factor by grouping. And then I'd be left with 5x squared minus 2, which is that, and then the match, which is x minus 2. Okay. This is advanced guess and check because if you remember when I gave you this problem, which looks very similar, you would do this. 2 numbers that multiply to get 36 to add to 13 are 9 and 4. When you add 2 negatives, they stay negative. And when you multiply 2 negatives, they turn positive. But the problem is that it's not just x squared, it's doubled. So it's really x squared. So that when you multiply back, x squared times x squared is x to the 4th. 9x squared and 4x squared gives you 13x squared plus 36. This is only going to work if it's kind of like cutting it in half. That's 2, that's 1. That's 4, that's 2. I want to show you an example. So if I had x cubed minus, x to the 6th minus 13x cubed plus 36, I could play the same game. X, 9, 4. But since it's cubed, or to the 6th, in order to get that, I would cut that in half. Because then I could go x to the 6th, 9x cubed and 4x cubed gives me 13x cubed. Now, if this was a 4, I couldn't do that. So it has to be whatever exponent, if that's cut in half, you can play this advanced game. Now, when you look, after that, you're going to have to check to see if you can square root. So if you look, I could square root this, x minus 3, x plus 3. And then I can square root this to x plus 2, x minus 2. I want to acknowledge, in addition to this problem, if you had x to the 4th minus, I don't know, let's see, x minus 4, plus 5x squared minus 36, I want to show that. You do pretend this said x squared plus 5x minus 36. X, 2 numbers that multiply to get 36 that add to 5 are plus 9 and minus 4. And then you would throw the squared back. Now the problem is this is plus. Let me pause it really quick. Okay, so as I was saying, for this one, you could not square root that, so you would have to keep it because it's plus. But since this is minus, square root, x minus 2, x plus 2. So that would be your answer for factoring. Be aware of that when it comes to these types of problems. Okay, so now that we've done this one, let's do this one. Okay, let's go through the list. Do they have something the same? No. We're going to go through. Can you square root them? No. Can you do guess and check? No, because there's 4 of them. Is it factor by grouping? Well, I know, because I can tell, that this is a 1 and a 5, so they don't have a GCF. That would match a 15 and a 27. You will learn this in 2 days. So for right now, you cannot factor it. That's what you're learning. You cannot factor it. But in 2 days, you will be able to factor it. Okay. Now that you've learned all the different ways to factor, let's actually solve this. And I want you to be aware of these types of problems. When I solve it, I'm trying to find x equals. Well, the number of x's will determine the degree of the exponent, or the degree of the expression. So this is squared. You should have 2 x's. Squared, 2 x's. Squared, 2 x's. Cubed, 3 x's. Cubed, 3 x's. Cubed, 3 x's. To the 4th power, 4 x's. And when you eventually learn this one, you will see there are 3. So I just want that to be clear. So I'm going to take my answer and set it equal to 0. A lot of you know that one equals 0, no problem. But I think this one, for some of you, you can do it in your head, but others of you, we need to show work. So minus 1, 3x equals negative 1. And my other answer is negative 1/3. Okay, we'll worry about how to check it later. Now I take this one, and I do the same thing. Set it equal to 0. That's solve. Notice the difference between factor and solve. So if I set this equal to 0, just like I did up here, I get x equals 3/5. And if I set this one equal to 0, I get x equals -1/2. Play the same game here, which I think a lot of these are repeat, but I just need to make sure you're solid. X equals -1/3. And if I set that equal to 0, x equals +1/3. Okay. This one is a little bit more difficult. So if I'm going to do this one, I think this one is clear. Now here's the deal. If you could factor this anymore, you would have. Since you can't factor it, your only option is the quadratic formula. So I'm going to show that on a separate piece of paper so I can take some space. Okay. So if I'm doing this problem, x squared minus 5x plus 25, and I'm going to do the quadratic formula, which for so many of you, this is no problem now. Simplify that. 4 times 1 times 25 is 100, -75. You're going to get an imaginary number most of the time. Since that's negative, that's your I. If I tree 75, I get 5 rad 3. So I get 5 plus or minus 5i rad 3 over 2. So that is my other answer, which I will now put here. X equals 5 plus or minus 5i rad 3 over 2. You know I can't check it. It's imaginary. Let's go to the next one. If you look at the next one and I set this equal to 0, if I'm trying to find x, the 3 isn't going to help me find it, so I don't care about it. The other one, x equals 2, and this I'm going to do the quadratic formula. You do that right now and we'll compare answers. The quadratic formula, and I have -2 plus or minus over 2. They all divide by 2. So my other answer is x equals -1 plus or minus I rad 3. Okay. Factor by grouping. Let me get there. I'm going to solve this one first, which is x equals 2. But since you see a 5x squared, you have to know you're going to get 2 more answers. It started with cubed. That means there's 3 values, and this is only 1. So I'm going to set this equal to 0, add 2, divide by 5, square root. And then I get x equals, it's rad 2 over rad 5, rad 5, which is rad 10 over 5 plus or minus. And honestly, at this point, I'm happy with that. I don't need the decimal approximation right now. Okay, sorry, this is a little blurry. Okay, let's go to this one. We have x minus 3, x plus 3, x plus 2, x minus 2 equals 0. X equals 3, x equals -3, x equals -2, x equals +2. Okay. Now I want to acknowledge the ones that we did before that we're talking about the x to the 4th. If you had this one and you had to set it equal to 0, this is 2 and this is -2. But since you couldn't factor that, you're going to have to solve. Subtract 9, square root, imaginary. X equals plus or minus 3i. So I need you to be aware of those types of things if that happens. Okay? And by the way, that was your homework. Your homework was to complete that. So as long as you took the notes, you're good to go.